And we are live. Welcome everyone to the 2020 September 16 Diagnostics Working Group meeting. We are going to first go through the agenda items, and after that we are going to do a deep dive on some topic that we are still going to decide. But before we move forward, does anyone have any announcements this week?
Not from me.
So I think two announcements that are worth mentioning in this meeting. The first one, the TSC decided that on V15, the default behavior for promise rejections will be to throw when a promise rejection is not handled. This is important for diagnostics because it provides more clarity for users in case the application enters a unknown state. And for users that use, for example, abortum code exceptions, it will generate a core dump, which is good. So from a diagnostics perspective, this is probably a positive change. For users that don't want that, it's still possible to go back to the previous behavior, either using the flag or using the unhandled rejection event on the process object. The second announcement, there is a proposal on TC39 for chainable errors. And let me see if I can get the link here. But the proposal is okay, I'm pasting the link on the chat. The proposal is by one of our working group members, and I believe it should make understanding errors when they propagate across multiple modules better. Although I haven't read the details of the proposal yet, but that's a proposal that I'm really excited for. So that's the announcements I had. Anyone have any other announcements? Okay, so moving forward to the items flagged for the agenda. The first one is Diagnostics channel. Do you have any updates on that, Stephen?
Yeah, it's the Diagnostics channel.
You are on.
Yeah, the Diagnostics channel. I've simplified it somewhat. I took out the dynamic subscribers. So now the only interface is to create a channel object, and so you have to know the exact name of the channel to subscribe to it. The dynamic subscribers, we may decide to add that back in later or a similar thing, but it complicated the pull request enough that it was decided that it would be better to just try and keep it simple, at least for the first pass. And I also added some changes to HTTP to use Diagnostics channel to emit a start and end event around HTTP request and response. There's an event that is emitted like right before the like request event is emitted from like the server, and then another event that is emitted basically when the finish happens on the response. And so you get like a complete life cycle of the request itself. And so with the hook before request, we can use that to enter an asynchronous storage context. So I have a test that demonstrates you can basically build a simple APM with zero patching. And I did some benchmarking, and seems to have slightly better performance than monkey patching, but not too significantly. That's an improvement anyway, but the point of the pull request is less performance and more safety, I think. Monkey patching is notoriously unsafe, and it's also like fairly simplistic example. Just hooking into only HTTP is going to have like a small bit of overhead of your monkey patching, but a real APM is going to have like a whole bunch of patches around everything, so it's going to be a lot of overhead. And I also added a very simplistic span API, so it doesn't go nearly as far as stuff like OpenTelemetry or open tracing or any of those sorts of things. All it is an object that is used to express a sequence of events. And so like basically with Diagnostics channel itself, you'd normally hand it an object and it just passes that object through directly. It doesn't do anything with it. With a span, it wraps that in another object, which all it does is it adds an ID onto it, just a numeric ID, and it shares it between everything that's passed through this span. So you can attribute everything to the same span, but it still doesn't add timestamps or like anything like that. It's entirely up to the consuming end to decide what other things they want to add to it. It's purely just for being able to correlate events. And I think that's basically all my updates on Diagnostics channel right now. It hasn't really got any feedback in the last week, so it could really use another review pass, just to see if the direction I'm going in is good.
Are there any outstanding objections at this time?
There's not really any outstanding objections. There's a few feedback notes, which I haven't really done anything with because there wasn't really consensus. There was a note about, is Diagnostics channel the right name, or should we call it Diagnostic hooks to align with like async hooks and proof hooks? And there's another note which was, should publish the right name for the function to check if there's subscribers, and should it be a function or should it be a getter? So they're just small like ergonomics naming kind of things, but no like actual objections.
I will try to review it in the next few days. But overall, I'm really excited to have this API on Node.js.
Yeah, it should be pretty good. I'm currently working on, well, in the Diagnostics channel PR itself, I have like an extra commit that adds some events to HTTP, just to prove it out basically. and like to prove its benefit for being like not just in user land but in core, so we can emit core events. My current task that I'm working on at the moment is creating a pull request to add it to Express, so we can show that user land can use this as well, and just try and demonstrate like more expansively what benefits we can get from this, and that it's fairly generically usable.
Is the module experimental today? Is the diagnostics channel module experimental today?
So there's nothing merged yet. Like my opinion is it should be merged as experimental, just like everything else normally is. The pull request to Express is mostly to just demonstrate how to do it, just show the advantage of it, but I don't intend that to be immediately merged, or if it is merged, it would likely be like behind a flag, like a feature flag or something like that. But yeah, it's more a demo. Like the Express PR is more a demo than anything.
Yeah, I was wondering if the implementation of the pull request is marking the module as experimental already, or if that's something that needs to be done.
Sorry, what?
So the pull request to add diagnostics channel to Node.js, is that request also marking the diagnostics channel as experimental, or do we still need to do that before landing?
I'm not sure what all process there is other than I believe in the docs changes it lists it as experimental. It introduces a new doc file. I don't know if there's anything else we need to do for marking a new module as experimental.
I'm not sure how it was with async hooks, but with the report, diagnostics report, wherever, it was behind a flag.
Yeah, so I'm not sure it needs to be behind a flag or not. The API itself, like it being used in core, maybe you could put it behind a flag, but like it's really like its use in the rest of core would be really minimal. Like you're just creating a channel and you have like a simple Boolean check on it. So I can't really foresee like any issues to it landing without a flag, but I mean it's up to the ecosystem or up to like the contributors to like other contributors to decide what the landing process should be, I think. And that hasn't really been discussed at all in the pull request yet. So I don't know. It's up to the other contributors.
Okay. Anyone have any questions on that topic? Okay, we can move forward then. The next item is async hooks stable API tracking issue.
Yeah, so that there was one small thing relating to that, which is there's apparently an issue in an API that it doesn't correctly reuse the context in like a certain signature of make a callback. I forget the exact details of it. There's cynical find the issue. I just pasted it in chat. Now there's like it's like a discrepancy between what the docs say and what it actually does. There's some uncertainty about which would be the correct behavior. So there's no pull request for it. It's just a bug report at the moment. So we should probably look at that and figure out what the correct thing to do is. I just saw this before the meeting, so I haven't looked or thought too deeply about it. But yeah, we should think about it.
Okay. Anyone have any questions on that? Right, moving forward to the next item. Add IO redis to problematic modules.md. So this was a request opened 2 days ago to a file that I had no idea existed. Basically, this problematic modules file lists modules that break async continuity. So basically modules that the way they implement asynchronous breaks the continuity concept on async hooks, which makes it harder for APMs to correlate events, as well as any other async hook users. So we have some modules here. We don't have much information on how they break the continuity. And in my opinion, the existence of this file on the working group, unless we are actively working with those maintainers, is problematic on its own. Just because, like, it sounds like a list of modules that users shouldn't use. And personally, I don't feel comfortable recommending that to users.
Yeah, there's the doc. I do agree that it's kind of problematic. The reason it was created in the first place was just because, like, yeah, there's these context loss issues in some of these modules, and the reason for it was that there was a few pull requests being opened to some of these modules, and because async hooks is experimental and still remains experimental to this day, a few of those pull requests were getting rejected or just sitting in limbo forever. So we wanted a way to keep track of these things that need to be fixed, and yeah, I would agree that probably the wording of the doc is not great, but yeah, I feel like the way forward is for us to, like, as soon as possible, try to get at least async resource out of experimental, and probably async local storage as well. And then we can start actually doing something about these modules. But yeah, having the doc there was, in my opinion, kind of a dumping ground of, like, this is a bunch of stuff that's broken and we'll maybe get to it someday, and no one actually does get to it.
What if we move that document to an issue instead with better wording and with explanation on how each module breaks async continuity, as well as the pull request that was rejected?
Yeah, that makes sense. The reason for why they break continuity though is not always super well known. A bunch of the stuff in there is just kind of reported that this module breaks. We're not sure why. Like, if it was like fairly clear how to fix it, then they probably would have just opened a pull request for it. There, like as I said before, though, there was still the issue of some modules were just not accepting pull requests related to that because of async resource being experimental.
Okay, so I'm gonna create an action item for myself to remove the document and move it to an issue. And we should try to work with other collaborators to get async resource and async local storage out of experimental.
How we can tracking the fix it for the problems. So the document, the issue has some modules that not work so well with async hooks, but when they fix it, how we can update the issue, how we can track it.
I don't have a good answer besides testing the module or going to the repository and looking for a pull request. If anyone has any other ideas.
But if we have like an actual issue for this in the repo instead of just this markdown file, we can link to that in any pull requests we make to like other modules to fix their problems. Or like we can also like have somewhere that we can regularly post like update comments. And like we could also potentially like have a separate issue for each module that has a problem so that we can discuss them like individually a little more specifically in one place if we don't want to do that in that module itself instead.
So for it into the issue, we need to some issue on the module for we track it, or like on DPR we have just the module but don't have any issue points to the error with async hooks. So we don't know actually if the async hooks really work or no.
I like Stephen's idea to have a separate issue for each module, and then we can have a label for this ongoing effort and know if a module is working or not. We should have at least one code example on each issue. So
Yep.
even if we don't know why something breaks, we can at least test if it was fixed. A code example.
Yeah, a reproduction case will help a lot for like, especially if we have like other people interested in helping the working group that just come along and like read this issue and are like, oh yeah, this module's broken and there's this useful test case I can run right here. I can use that to debug this myself. So I think it's good like first issue that kind of content to work with. Also helps us if we get to fixing these things in the future. Just to have a like somewhere to start from rather than just, oh, there's something broken somewhere in this module. Have at it.
Yeah, sounds good for me.
Cool. Does anyone have any other questions or suggestions on this topic? Okay. So we reached the end of the agenda items. Now we can go to a deep dive. The last meeting we did a review of one of the previous user journeys. We can do that again unless someone has any other suggestions. So just for context, those are all the items we have flagged for deep dives. Diagnostics channel, user journeys, review the user journeys document to mention BPF, unified hooks, production and readiness guide, identify subsystems on node card that benefit from trace points. We should probably have the same for diagnostics channel now. Triaging issues on the repository and best practices guide. So I would suggest we do user journeys again and revisit one of the user journeys we done in the past, probably performance, I think, or crash. I don't know which one was the one after memory. But we can also talk about unified hooks. No takers?
I'm good with anything.
Okay, I think we can go with user journeys then. Let me just get the document here.
And can you also ping the URL in the chat window? Hello, Mary. Are you speaking?
Dropped out apparently.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not able to hear Mary. Probably we should wait for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Mary needs to be promoted.
Hello.
Hi, Mary. Good drop off.
So my Wi-Fi adapter crashed for some reason, and I had to reboot.
No problem. So I guess you were trying to share the document for the user journeys.
Yes.
Yeah.
I shared the link on chat, and now I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah.
So previous meeting we reviewed the memory document. This week let's review the process crash. So the symptoms of process crashes are in certain scenarios our applications can throw an code exception or an unhandled rejection and cause the process to exit. In some cases, the stack trace generated during the crash provides enough information to understand and fix the issue, but it's not always the case. It can be especially challenging to understand application behavior that lead to an exception, and either our stack is different from the original stack trace or we need more information, like the internal state of the application to make conclusions. The process of debugging a crashed process is called Postpartum Debugging. Debugging postmortem is a technique which allows developers to gather insights and find bugs in production processes after those issues happen, even if the application crashes or goes into an infinite loop. This is a common technique for static languages, and Node.js has support for it as well, through Node basically. So we have two different types of crashes, low-level crashes, which provides no trace data, no stack trace, no objects printed to the output, and the data is available via core dump only. This is usually caused by bugs in Node.js runtime and dependencies. For example, Git crashes when some input for a function is missing. It will crash the application. Native modules can have bugs that can crash the application, or memory leaks can exhaust the heap, leading to the process to crash, which provides information about garbage collection and allocation patterns, but it doesn't provide much information with regards to JavaScript execution. If anyone has comments, suggestions to improve the document, or questions, feel free to stop me at any time. Otherwise, I just keep reading since we have 15 minutes. And the second type are JavaScript crashes, which come either from uncalled exceptions or unhandled rejections. Stack trace can have enough information in some cases. In some cases, the error message can be tempered by the error handling pipeline. and the user needs to extract original metadata. Third-party libraries without useful stack traces can be problematic to diagnose. And in some cases, when the stack trace is not enough, inspecting the heap is important to look, for example, in an HTTP server, you might have a crash that doesn't have anything attached to the error object, and you want to look at what was in the request object at the time it crashed. So being able to inspect the heap after a crash happens is a very powerful tool. And in cases where the original stack trace is replaced by something else, finding the original stack trace or the original error object is also important. Error rethrow is not really a problem unless you are using the abort uncalled exception flag, because when you rethrow an error, you preserve the stack. So I guess we can remove that. Yeah, and there are the cases with error wrapping. For example, if users are using the verror library, where I don't think all stack traces are printed on crash, but I'm not entirely sure. Coding tools with gaps and user journeys. We have the Diagnostics report, which was added last year, I think, to Node.js. We have error properties, non-iterable properties like property not print. I'm not sure if that's still true.
I believe there was a peer to address this gap. Basically, rather than printing the error messages, we also inspect the error object and see if it can be expanded, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know we had this functionality when printing to the standard error for a while. I'm not sure if it can detect non-iterable properties on an object just because they are non-iterable and you have to iterate to print them. And I think this year we merged the request to have this on Diagnostics report as well. So the situation is probably slightly better. But I think that statement is still true, but it needs to be explained further.
Yeah.
And car dumps that are not user friendly and super hard to maintain. It's not working on V14, for example. Diagnostics report. They are a snapshot of the runtime or of the process. They provide a lot of environmental information. They can help identify runtime configuration misuse. For example, missing new limit, exhausting sockets, etc. It provides both JavaScript stack trace and native stack, depending on the use case. Which shared libraries are expected versus which ones are available. And it has some information about recent GC activity. So it provides a good snapshot, provides good information. And depending on the issue, it will be enough. to diagnose the problem. It's also worth noting Diagnostics report is a structured format, which means it can be passed to processing tools, for example, to aggregate stack traces and try to identify which stack trace is happening most commonly on a fleet of microservices. So it has a lot of good functionality. The next one is card dumps with LL
Maybe
Node.
one of the item that may be added here is it also provides an insight into the libuv handles.
Yeah, I think that's a new feature, right?
Yeah. So the one of the use case would be like diagnosing hangs, or to figure out why the process is not exiting. Is there any active handles? Are there timers still needing to fire? If yes, what is the elapsed, or what is the expected time into the future, etc. So that level of inspection is possible with the help of report.
Yeah, that's a very good feature. It's especially useful for processes that are hanging, but it can be useful for other processes as well.
Yep.
It can also be useful to understand what was not executed when the process crashed.
Yep.
All right, moving to card dumps. Card dumps are analyzed with LL Node. There's another tool in DBV8, but it only works up to Node 8, which is not maintained anymore. So it's not really worth adding to the document. So LL Node allows users to inspect the heap, and more importantly, inspect objects, properties on the heap, properties and values. It shows a stack trace that caused the crash, which is the exact stack trace that caused the crash. So for example, for uncalled exceptions, it will be most likely the stack trace of the uncalled exception plus some native functions. For unhandled rejection, since we can't crash at the exact moment it happens, we can only crash once we drain the microtask wheel. The stack trace that is printed by LL Node is not the same as the unhandled rejection, but the unhandled rejection can be found on the stack trace, and from that you can find the original stack trace. It's a bit of a manual labor thing, and it's hard to provide a function that is universal and we will always find a rejection on the stack, but it works in most cases. Factoring a stack trace from error as long as it was not overridden, and inspect error properties, which was a bigger feature in the past. Right now, since we print properties to standard error and to diagnostics report, it's not such a killer feature anymore compared to the other tools, but it's still useful. It's just another way that the user can get those properties. And speaking of error properties, they were added on V12, which means we still have one LTS without error properties. Shows the error classes. I'm not sure what that means. Shows error properties, show enumerable error properties. Doesn't show all the properties like prototype properties. It might not be reliable to get prototype properties. It might also be a performance issue if you have to iterate through all the prototypes to get all properties. And on the plus side, having error properties can reduce the use cases where you need to use core dumps. And there is a suggestion to reduce the number of Node.js core frames in the stack trace, which personally I'm not so favorable of. I still think this should be done on the client side, on the consumer of the error, but that's a possibility. And it can show nested errors. Not entirely sure how deep on the nesting it will be shown, but it can show, so that's a good thing. Another tool that can be used are trace events. If you can go get the flow before it crashes, which is not always possible, especially with native crashes. We have some trace points inside core. Users can add trace points to their applications as well. Controlling tracing is not possible today. I'm not entirely sure what that means or if that's still true. So I'm gonna add an action item to double check that. And we don't know about tools today that use trace events. I think there might be one or two tools from Nearform that use trace events, and also Chrome Dev tools. But other than that, it's not a widespread technology. And last, Buggering can be used to detect double free, invalid memory access, etc. All those things that can crash native code in unexpected ways. And I think we have a guide for Buggering now in the repository. So some user journeys, memory leaks can cause crashes when the process runs out of memory. Diagnostic report can be used to understand JavaScript memory leaks. Open the generated report. Take a look at the allocation section in the report. Look for outspace usage. And basically look if the usage is higher than available, considerably higher. That can help determine if the crash was from a memory leak or at least a memory exhaustion. Looking at the JavaScript stack can show the victim of the memory leak. but that's not necessarily the place where the allocations are happening. And also the JavaScript stack trace won't always point to the right frame, which can be confusing. And for more information, users can refer to the memory user journey. With LLNode, users can grab the card dump and load on LLNode and then run find.js objects. This will give them the objects by prototype name with size plus the count. In some cases, when a class is leaking, and a well-known class is leaking, you can easily understand what's causing the issue, and you can also use find graphs to understand what is retaining those objects on memory. And if you can't find the cause, you can look at memory-related user journeys and try to use one of the tools we have there. For native memory leaks, Buggering is the tool to go on development environments. And users can refer to the documentation we have on the repository. If the problem only happens on production and the user is on Linux, then they can use BPF. On FreeBSD, they can use dtrace. On Windows, ETW, and probably others. Basically, any tracing tool that the operating system provides can be used here. We might want a guide here, or at least point to a guide on how to perform those investigations. But the idea is similar to Buggering. The user will trace memory allocations and memory freeze, and when the process crashes, the BPF program or whatever will print all allocations that were not freed, and those are the leaks on the application. Other things the user can consider, well, these are just steps to use LNode. There's a bit of groundwork that needs to be done. For example, the U limit needs to be set for the process, a button code exception has to be used. The user needs to download core dump from the machine and the Node.js binary from Node.js.org. Then they have to open LNode and run the commands that LNode provides. This is a good thing to have on a production readiness guide for users that want to be able to use LNode. And we have a lot of to-dos and questions here. I'm not going to read everything because we're past 5 minutes already. I think this one was more up to date and complete than the memory one. And my guess is the performance and unexpected behavior ones are also in a better shape since we completed them recently. So maybe we should call these done as deep dives. And now we should focus on moving them to the website. What do others think?
Yeah, makes sense to me, but do we have a discussion around how do we move it to the website? Is it as is, or do we need to make some beautification, such as adding additional supporting data, screenshots, or I'm just thinking aloud. What
Uh,
is your thought around?
I think we can start moving, like choosing one of the guides we have on the repository and moving to the website. There is a bit of work that needs to be done for the format to be compatible, the website, and my suggestion is that we use the new website. Um, the new website uses Markdown, so that's good. We are already using Markdown. We just need to add the metadata to the Markdown that we have, and then open a pull request to the website, ask questions for the folks there, and we can iterate there as well to add, for example, screenshots and etc. I think
Yeah.
we add one or two guides now and we see it on the website, we will have a better idea of what can be improved.
Yeah. So for that matter, we already have some documentation reviewed in the diagnostic working group itself and Lander. If you look at the documentation folder, you would see a few of them in completed state. So are you suggesting that we could publish that to the website and then start picking up the content from this document?
Yes.
Okay. Or it could be parallel as well. For example, somebody can pick up sections from this document and PR in the repo itself in the documentation folder with the proper markdown and screenshots and other supporting data as applicable. And another workflow can pick up from the landed PRs to publish in the website.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
And once we move things to the website, I think we can remove the documentations folder in the repository.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then we can have ourselves as code owners on the new website for the diagnostics related documents.
Yep.
Sounds good. So I'm gonna remove the issue from deep dives next, and I'm gonna make a comment there just pointing again to the issue I have with the website's folks discussing moving things there. If anyone wants to pick it up and send a request to the website, great. Otherwise, I might have time to do it in a couple weeks. I'm kind of swamped right now. Great. That's it for today. Um, have a good weekend, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye bye.